Hello, my name is Naresh Nandakumar, and I'm a PhD student at the Neural Systems Analysis Lab at Johns Hopkins University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Niharika D'Souza, and I'm also a PhD student at the Neural Systems Analysis Laboratory at Johns Hopkins. Today, we are delighted to have Dr. Archana Venkatraman with us and learn a little bit more about her and her work. So with that being said, we can dive right in. So Professor Venkatraman, would you mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit more insight into your work and your research?
Sure. So first, I'd like to thank you and Naresh for kindly asking me to take part. It's really a great honor that to participate in this interview. So as to your question, I'm currently the John C. Malone Assistant Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. And very broadly, my research lies in this intersection of medical imaging, artificial intelligence or machine learning, and then clinical neuroscience. And so at a very broad, high level, what the lab does is we develop new computational tools, algorithms, and modeling frameworks to essentially better parse these neuroimaging and also genetics and other types of data sets to gain some insight into neurological and psychiatric disorders. And this really spans a broad spectrum of projects and application domains. So in a foundational sense, we do a lot of work with connectomics, understanding functional and structural connectivity, and even imaging genetics. So trying to relate neuroimaging, biomarkers, and genetic markers. On a more translational front, we do some work with pre-surgical planning in the context of brain tumors and epilepsy. And then we have some exploratory projects where we're trying to take a system level view of the brain and of potentially mental illness or physical illness and characterize, let's say, the enteric nervous system. So trying to map that out, as well as understand how emotional cues are conveyed and can be manipulated in speech.
Thank you. Thanks for that insight into your work. And since we are within the realm of MICCAI, that actually fits in perfectly with the themes that MICCAI has been up and coming within MICCAI. So along that vein, I'd like to ask you maybe to describe how you got introduced to the MICCAI community and how your involvement in the community has evolved over time.
Sure. So I'll say just in terms of educational trajectory, I did all three of my degrees at MIT. And during undergrad, I was really interested in signal processing. And so I did my master's thesis in a more traditional signal processing lab. And I think while that was really educational and informative, I found myself wanting a little bit more tangible application domain and sort of connection to real world problems, particularly in health. And so that's when I met my thesis advisor, Polina Golland, who is another woman star at MICCAI. And she was the one who actually introduced me to the community, to the different types of neuroimaging problems. And that's how I got into connectomics as my primary application for my PhD and largely my postdoc as well. So I have been attending MICCAI. I think my first one was New York in 2008, and then presenting at MICCAI starting in 2010. And it's been wonderful to really watch the trajectory of work and of new methods and problems in the community, and the trajectory and sort of enlargement in terms of more people, more participation globally at all different ranks. In terms of my participation, so I've organized workshops at MICCAI, and I've really tried to take on some of those leadership experiences there.
Cool. It's really cool to hear that you've been a part of the MICCAI community for around 12 to 13 years now. A quick follow-up question, just because I'm just 3 or 4 years into the MICCAI community myself. How have you watched the workshops, for example, grow over the years, or the challenges or these satellite events, and how have you spearheaded some of those forefronts, as you said that you've organized some workshops?
Yeah, so I think that the workshops and satellite events have really increased over the years. And I think that it's actually a really nice and fantastic thing. because it allows a more targeted forum to really drive into certain application domains or certain types of techniques. And I think it's a testament to just how broad the MICCAI community has become in general. So there's so many problems that we're now working on that it makes sense to have these more targeted satellites. And as well, the challenges have also grown. And I think these challenges are a great source of data for the community, as well as just publicly available data, and a good way to really compare methods and to with an eye on reproducibility. So for myself, I organized, I think it was probably the first brain connectivity workshop in 2013. It was called Mathematical Methods for Brain Connectivity. It was a small workshop at the time, but we had some really nice keynotes and some nice discussion, and I found that very rewarding experience as a postdoc. And then I kind of restarted that sort of organizational initiatives with the connectomics and neuroimaging workshop when I joined the organizational team in 2019. And that year, I also helped spearhead a challenge as part of the CNI workshop involving data that was actually acquired by one of my collaborators at Kennedy Krieger. So
Cool.
we did a connectomics classification task.
Cool. I mean, but before I really want to ask you about what the challenge was, but before we get into that, I'm curious, like, what goes into organizing a workshop and finding co-leaders or co-organizers, because it's something I've just been interested in as being a participant in a couple of workshops at this point.
So I think workshop organization, it's a fairly extended process. So typically a workshop is organized around a topic which you're passionate about or you have a lot of expertise based on your research. And there's usually a natural set of folks that you can identify to help you co-lead that and develop the organizational team. Then these days, there's so many workshops that you would submit a proposal as to what you're going to do and more details about that. And if you're selected, then you as organizers, essentially your job is to manage the entire process until we get to the day of, so that attendees actually experience a smooth workshop. So that's everything from finding reviewers, which is typically the program committee of a workshop, figuring out a paper review system, so CMT or open review, assigning papers, collecting reviews, making decisions, setting the program, finding keynote speakers, and really just getting the entire agenda finalized so that, again, the day of, it's a really nice flow for the participants.
Cool. Just a small follow-up before we go into the specific workshop. So how did you meet the co-organizers for the last workshop that you organized?
So the CNI workshop, I actually met some of them in 2018 in Granada, or 2018 in Granada, where my student, actually you, presented at the CNI workshop. And then following there, I joined the organizing team. And I'd also known the previous organizers from presenting in the workshop in 2017. So that is one way you can meet organizers.
Cool. And the last question I guess I have on this before we move forward is, could you just briefly explain the challenge and how it might intersect with some of your personal research passions or endeavors?
Sure. So the challenge associated with CNI was called the Transfer Learning Challenge. And we kind of took a twist on the idea of transfer learning. So really the broad goal of the challenge was two parts: to see how reliable is resting state fMRI or discriminative is resting state fMRI in terms of discrimination between groups. And then to probe in one way, can we see whether resting state fMRI is finding transferable biomarkers of a particular disorder? And so the primary disorder we looked at was ADHD. And so from my collaborators at Kennedy Krieger, we had a large data set of ADHD in control children, all kind of age match, gender match, IQ match. And so the first part of the challenge was just to be able to discriminate. So there was some amount of data for training and validation, and then we had another data set for testing. The transfer part of the challenge is at Kennedy Krieger, which focuses on neurodevelopmental disorders. They have a fairly large autism cohort, and it turns out that ADHD is a very common comorbidity of autism. And so we had an autism cohort who had a comorbidity of ADHD that was diagnosed. And so the question was, could the models that were trained just on ADHD and control classification actually perform well on a related population that shared some of the same deficits? And so that was the kind of motivation behind the challenge. And I think it was a fairly interesting challenge in terms of the results. So the ADHD versus control classification, we certainly had methods that performed better and methods that performed a little bit worse. And what's really interesting is when we moved to the transfer learning, the performance completely decayed back to almost chance level. And so I think what that shows is that we as a community have a considerable amount of work to do before we're able to be confident that resting state is really picking up these generalizable biomarkers. And I think the challenge itself, the data is still available and it's open. So it's a good resource for folks who are interested in these types of questions.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. As someone who has been working in the connectomics field for a while, I actually attended CNI 2019 and really enjoyed all the papers, especially the challenge results. And I think it was a really interesting and nice workshop. So switching gears a little bit, I'd actually like to ask you about your research and academic background a little. So if you don't mind, would you like to share your experiences as you transition from, say, an undergraduate to graduate to postdoc to professor level, how your expectations and how the challenges you face changed over time?
Sure. So I think each stage, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc, and faculty, they come with their own set of pros and cons, and it's very person dependent. So some people thrive in different environments. So for me, specifically, undergraduate was very focused. It was very fast paced. I did mostly electrical engineering courses in the realm of signal processing, image processing. So I think on one hand, the con was it was very busy, but then the pro is that it's very structured, right? There's deadlines, there's assignments, and it's a structure with a very constant cycle and very short time frame. So everything's done within the scope of a week to a month, right? I think the transition to graduate school was interesting because it's a completely different environment. With the exception of a few coursework at MIT, it's very unstructured in terms of your timing. And so it's something I had to get used to for sort of trying to understand how to manage my time and how to kind of deal with both the sort of rush when everything picks up, as well as these lulls when you're just working towards a new idea. So I think for me, navigating that unstructured nature was challenging. But then the plus is that it gives you a lot of intellectual freedom to really sort of formulate your expertise and your project, to learn more about really interesting topics and to start meeting really cool collaborators. And I think when you transition to postdoc, it's not too terribly different from graduate school, but it's a little bit more intense in that you need to build up your independence a little bit more and essentially your resume or your package, because you want to apply for positions afterwards. So I think there's some amount of stress, but it's also, again, a little bit more in terms of flexibility of navigating different projects and different interests and collaborations so that you can really build up a new set of expertise moving on. And then at faculty, I would say that jump for me, was the largest change, because instead of the entire academic trajectory, just focusing on your own work and your own projects and your own sort of bubble, being faculty is a lot more about really understanding high-level goals, high-level visions, working out logistics, people management, financial management. So there's just a wider range of responsibilities, and there's a wider range of skill sets that honestly, I don't think we actually cultivate very well throughout that pathway. So I think it's much more kind of being dumped in the deep end of a pool and figuring your way out.
Thanks for sharing that. So as a quick follow-up, on a personal note, would you like to share what you enjoyed most about each of these stages? So what was the most fun part about progressing through each of these stages individually?
So for me, I think undergrad was fun because I actually really liked structure and fast-paced environments. And it was also fun because I think you build up the broadest set of knowledge, right? You take all of these classes in all of these different fields, different subjects, humanities, engineering, etc. So I think I really enjoyed the breadth of knowledge and the pacing. For graduate school, I think what was really nice from a research standpoint is just to develop expertise in something and really come up with my own new ideas, new projects, and sort of taking those and transforming them into sort of papers and methods, etc. And then I also started to like the unstructured nature of graduate school because it gave me some time to focus just on myself and developing as a person. So I got my dog during graduate school, and I would highly recommend doing that if you're interested in getting a dog because you have that flexibility to take care of it. With my dog, I started running outdoors in all sorts of weather. So we've run through thunderstorms and blizzards and ice and whatnot. So I feel like I got a lot more robust or was able to handle a lot more because of that experience. I was president of my dorm for a year, so I got some leadership experience and people management experience that way. So it really, beyond just the research, I think it gave me the time to do all of those things. And then in postdoc, I think what I enjoyed the most is actually sort of meeting my autism collaborators and learning more about problems that are a little more clinical neuroscience oriented and realizing that's kind of the direction I wanted to take a future faculty lab is to really focus on these clinical problems and develop these clinical collaborations and target something that might in the future have some sort of therapeutic application. So that was really rewarding. And then as faculty, I think the most rewarding part is just mentoring you guys and watching you develop both as researchers and as people and improving your skill sets. And just, I think all of my students are amazing. And so again, watching them grow has been the best part of faculty life.
Thanks, Archana. That's very sweet of you to say. And I think it's nice to hear your insight specifically going from postdoc to faculty and like how you decided what you wanted your lab's focus to be, because I'm unsure of like what I want to do when I graduate. So I've always liked to hear about how PIs decided to try to become a PI. So we have a few minutes left, and I would like to just conclude on just one, maybe 2 or 3 minute long question. And it would just be if you have any advice from the heart for a new up and rising student that is very interested in the MICCAI community, any struggles or takeaway stories?
I mean, I think for new students, I would highly recommend that they get involved in some of the different opportunities for students. So their student group at MICCAI, the Student Association, has grown tremendously since I started. And I think that's been a real benefit. So there's really a good cohort of students to act as sort of senior mentors. Also, just talking to people at conferences. I know it can be scary, but really just going up at a poster session and saying, hi, this is sort of where you're from, what you're working on, asking for a description of their work, and even talking to faculty and PIs that might not be at your institution. It's a good way of meeting people. And so I would encourage new students to either get involved in some of the student activities or just to use the time at MICCAI to meet others, because that's really the value of the conference is really the networking aspect of it.
Great. Thanks for your advice. With that, we'd like to conclude our interview. It was really nice speaking with you, Professor Venkatraman. It's been an honor working for you. Niharika.
This was a really fun experience for me as well, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was great getting to know a little bit more about you, and we hope to collaborate with you in the future as well on such endeavors. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you again for the invitation. So it was a lot of fun, and it's an honor that you chose to interview me.